We're so happy to have you here today. This is the Burnout-Proof Camp Leadership session, where we're going to be exploring how to create a well-balanced, burnout-proof leadership structure for camps of all sizes. At the heart of every camp, every great camp, are members who are committed to the to the principles of communal effort and participation. I'm always get nervous at the beginning. Sorry, everybody. In that spirit, we'll explore strategies for getting enthusiastic involvement from all campmates from the moment they join your camp to the last post-playa unpacking and decompression. My name is Peta. I am your host today for this breakout session, and we've got some great panelists that I am now going to introduce. Before I do that, however, I just want to make sure that you're aware of the meeting guidelines. So for our meeting guidelines, you are going to be able to participate in the chat. And so we're asking for respectful language in the chat. There is going to be a Q&A at the end of the chat, so you can add your questions to the chat anytime. And our chat moderator, Andy, is going to be collecting them, and then we'll answer those questions at the end of our session. So please be mindful and of your participation, and here we go. I'm first going to introduce T-Fire. T-Fire is the camp lead for the Deadbeat Club, which is within the infamous Barbie Death Village. A morning person, T-Fire has been serving pulled to order espresso on the playa since 2019. She's also involved and active in the Bureau of Erotic Discourse, or BED, and provides training for all of Barbie. In the default world, T-Fire is an anthropologist and filmmaker currently teaching media at USC. We have 20 people in Deadbeat Club and 200 in Barbie Death Village. Thank you, T-Fire, for being one of our panelists. Oops, hang on. All right, our next panelist I'm going to introduce is KJ, formerly Laughing John, RIP, Staten, they, them. KJ was camp lead for Black Rock City Post Office, BRC 3PO, from its founding in 2012, with 24 campers until 2022, capped at 51 campers, including leading a virtual BRC 3PO in 2020 and in 2021. KJ successfully guided a leadership succession plan for BRC 3PO and is now Postmaster Emeritus. What a great place to be. KJ's first burn was 1998, and they've not missed a burn since. They have been a themed camp advisor with camp for several years, specializing in helping camps to place creative interaction at the core of their purpose. In 2023, KJ moved from the North Bay of California to British Columbia and Costa Rica. Pura vida, eh? Welcome, KJ. And next we have Jason. Jason, I didn't get how to pronounce your last name. Siadek? You can just, yep, okay, thanks. Has been burning since, what?
Siadek,
got it. Has been burning since 1998 and started putting art on the playa in 2002, bringing art cars since 2003 and organizing theme camps since 2005. So we've got some pretty veteran camp leads here. His current camp, Post-Nuclear Family, has a roster of around 60 members and has hosted a wide range of interactive art since 2009. Jason's most recent project is Starship Qubit, a mutant vehicle starship simulator. Post-Nuclear Family is a home for artists to come together as a family of friends. And as I mentioned, I'm Peta. I'm from Fafa Camp. We're an international camp of about 50 people. I'm also a volunteer for camp support and live in Northern California. Our chat mod today is Andy, and he's coming from Polaris. And Chomp is our tech moderator, and her camp is Clusterfuck United. cannot swear when things get put up on YouTube. So welcome to everybody. So good to see you. We've got 57 people in our audience. If you are just joining, you might have noticed in the chat that we do have, we're asking you to introduce yourself with your name, where you're calling in from, and the name of your camp. So as I mentioned when we first started, we have a very short time today. And so I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. First, we're going to be creating a little bit of context for the session. Then we're going to talk about internal strategies to avoid burnout. Then we're going to talk about leadership structure strategies, and then camp participation strategies, and then talk a little bit about mindfulness and how we can, in some ways, take care of ourselves as camp leads. Then we will have our time for Q&A. So once again, anytime you have a question, pop it in that chat. And Andy, our chat mod, is going to harvest all those questions and ask us at the end of our session. So good to see everybody. So let's go ahead and get started. This is a question for our panelists. This is a question for our participants as well. Why do we burn out as camp leads? What causes burnout? Can we zoom in on some of the key factors that contribute to burnout, especially considering that many of us are doing this year-round? Burning Man for many of us is not just that 10 days in the desert. It is something we are working on year-round. So, panelists and participants, what do you have to say? Why do we burn out?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. As a formerly burned out camp lead who tried a lot of different strategies, but noticed a kind of a pattern it seemed like a lot of camp leads went through, which is you start a camp and there's usually a few friends and they're kind of all in it together who are kind of leading the thing, and everyone does everything. And there's a lot of energy generated, and it's, you know, smaller usually at the beginning, and it's a lot of fun. And you do it, you learn a lot, you come back the next year. But if your camp grows, as ours did, and as a lot of camps do, and become more complex, and because the structure of placement has one person as a TCO, things can kind of like get centralized around one person. And then suddenly it's not like we're all in this together. You've got, you know, then you have to start kind of figuring out how to organize all of this so stuff gets done. And if you're not really that great at being a manager and kind of making that happen, also you're dealing with a wide variety of people from all over the country or the world. It's very easy to end up as the person who's the go-to person, especially on the ground in Black Rock City. And I would find myself all day long being approached by different people about everything. And pretty soon, like my whole burn was consumed in our theme camp. And it seemed like this happened to other people too. So I think there's something about the structure of this system of kind of starting a theme camp that can lead to this pattern.
Thanks, KJ. And also noting a lot of the good comments or interesting comments in the chat. So thanks for participating, participants. Jason or T-Fire, would you like to add anything to this about why we burn out?
I saw a comment in there that I really loved about the radio silence, right? That we're doing this year round, putting out the messages, putting out calls for feedback so that we're not going it alone or seeming like, you know, we're trying to not take feedback, but then we're not getting input from people. And then what I found is that it sort of becomes a feedback loop where if I'm like, okay, friends, come on, chime in. And if I'm seeming stressed, then the feedback that I'm going to get is you're taking on too much. It doesn't have to be this complicated, right? And so there's something about keeping a really gentle energy, reminding myself why I do it, and projecting out this energy of I choose to be here. I choose to do this. Right. So that's sort of what comes back at me.
Yeah,
Thank
I echo a lot of that. Also, T-Fire and KJ. The thing for me that's kept me going has been a lot of feeling that I'm sharing an art with the playa, and if people don't want to participate, then that's up to them, and it can be really hard when people are just going to Burning Man just to see the burn, and they aren't really necessarily in line with trying to make the theme camp happen, and it can be hard.
Absolutely. And I'd say I resonate with the comment in the chat where I start to get a lot of anxiety and stress, especially as we get closer to the departure date, because I feel this overwhelming responsibility for everyone's happiness and enjoyment, which is a fault. Just saying, I wish I didn't. And I think that's where, when we talk later about the mindfulness and kind of like looking at how we perceive our role and who we are, which we will be talking about later in the session, that's where that comes up for me. And also someone put in there, and I agree too, is that, I feel like I'm getting older. When I started being the lead, I was younger. Now I'm older. That's kind of what happens, right? And it's, how do we deal with that? And passing the baton, like KJ talked about, is a very important aspect of being ready to pass the baton and being ready to kind of let go of that identity. Before
I'll
we
just
move
make
on, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I was
one
going to
more
add,
comment.
please.
It seems like the skill set it takes to kind of start and launch a camp, and that, generating that energy and making it happen isn't necessarily the same skill set as once you're kind of like, you've got 40 or 50 people, whatever you have, and managing that, like that kind of building, leading, creating energy is different from the kind of the management skills. And I think that some of us have run into our own limitations in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Jason, T-Fire, any last words before we move on to our next topic?
I'll just reiterate, I think KJ's spot on that I think cheerleader and recruiter is very different from manager and keep the flame burning person. Sometimes it can be both, but yeah, those are different skills.
Yeah, such a good point. And sometimes, we just get tired of cheerleading. Honestly, I think there's just some fatigue that comes in. So thinking about burnout and thinking about, there is a tendency to burn out. We love what we do in so many ways, but I know for me that there's just sometimes where I'm like, whew, this is a tough job. So how do we keep that inner flame, that burning, desire? How do we keep that ablaze? And I'm going to lead Jason here to talk about keeping that internal flame ablaze.
Yeah, I have some prepared thoughts, but I'm happy to amend and look at the chat over there to the side. But yeah, I have a lot of experience staying motivated and hopeful by treating my camp as an art project. And it's a collaborative art project, and it is all year long. And we face those same challenges, all of us, just in preparing for this conversation and conversations on the playa. We all know that crusty burner who, has that ache, and it's like, oh, the truck, the cleanup crew, the whatever, the herding cats can cause that sort of a lot of cat scratches and a lot of bites. And sometimes it's a thankless job. And I think one way to keep that burn and that flame going is just to remember that this is our art. This is what we're bringing, and it's not easy, but it is so rewarding and so great. And there are ways to stay on top of it so that it doesn't feel like it's over you. And so I've just got some notes here that I want to make sure to hit. I think we all have that joy for the burn in our core, and then that gets hidden or smoked out. Problems arise, and it's hard to find that. But that ember is always within us. The reason that we do it isn't external, it's internal, and externalities can block us from that. So that's just something to kind of look to yourself, that you are your best second in command, to make sure that you lead yourself, because we can forget to take care of ourselves. We can forget that other people are having their burn, and so something that I put in here, and I just wanted to kind of take a moment, because I don't know if we've had that moment today other than for lunch, but let's just take a moment to kind of roll our shoulders and roll our necks and inhale. And exhale, and just take that moment to say, we're not in constant struggle. We can back away. We can take a moment for ourselves. And as things fall apart, it's just a matter of putting them back together again. And one way to make sure that things don't fall apart in a way that doesn't seem manageable is to be prepared, so that whatever comes up, you feel that you have either the skills or at least the internal tools to deal with it, because that flame is going to be, it's going to be hit by a lot of factors: wind, rain, dust. And so being as prepared as possible also is a matter of being prepared by being patient with yourself and being patient with the people around you. So it's not like you can just plan out the perfect burn, and when it doesn't happen that way, everything has gone wrong. It's that you prepare as best you can, and just to remember to stay, to believe in yourself, and just to know that our camps are made better by the people who participate in them. A theme camp is a very lonely place without all the people that make it up. And so keep that flame alive with that spark that was in you when you started. And if you can't find it, then take a break and look around and rekindle.
Love it. Thanks for all the suggestions, and just love what I'm seeing as well in the chat. Great. Again, please participate in the chat, because we're just 4 panelists here, and you've got so much. We've got 73 participants, and there's no right way, there's no wrong way. We're just, having this conversation. So super appreciate it. And remember, if you have questions, put it in the chat. We'll address those later. T-Fire, do you want to talk about how you draw on the 10 principles in order to help, keep that internal flame alive and to avoid burnout?
Yeah, happy to. And a little shout out to Anne in the comments for also drawing on the principles. So there was a lovely comment in there from Anne saying to use gifting as one of the strategies. So I have found, we use the cat metaphor a lot at Burning Man, right? And it's because cats are always on their own page doing their own thing. And as much as obviously we've got some core things in common, the things that draw people to the burn are so different that it's really hard to know how to appeal to people in a way that's going to be sort of collectively heard. And the one that I fall back on is definitely the principles. It feels like the one that even if people haven't fully absorbed the principles, bought into them, to me, it feels like it's the one that if you haven't been brought in by the principles, it's time. And I don't feel bad about sharing it and teaching the principles. And so it's the scaffolding that I use. And I do teaching around it. I do workshops around it. I have some beautiful hand-painted flags in our space that have each of the principles on it. So we've got constant reminders. And the ones that I kind of lean on as helpful for preventing burnout for myself and other people participating are the primary 4. So we talked about gifting, also civic responsibility, communal effort, and participation. And so I think, civic responsibility, participation, and communal effort, those feel like an easy interpretation. I really do love that Anne brought in the gift thing, because I think for so many people, gifting has become this sort of like fun, kitschy ritual, cargo cult ritual at Burning Man. But I think it's easy to overlook that our own service is a gift, right? And that includes putting up a shade structure. That includes when other campers roll up, get off your booty and see if they need help setting up, whatever it happens to be. Are they having a rough morning? Or even just if they're signed up for a shift, maybe, falling back and calling back the principals is a good way to say, hey, we're all in it together. I know you had a wild night and it's an early shift, but, can you gift us your time and energy, right? And I find it's a little bit hard to resist when we've all agreed to those terms.
Nice. So framing it, kind of framing it in that way. Fantastic. KJ, please add what you're thinking about around these internal strategies to avoid burnout.
Yes. I think one part of this is to look at, am I identifying as being the camp lead? And am I really looking at, is this the best for me and for my camp? So for me, after kind of burning out, my next step was to find, what my sweet spot is more leading initiatives, setting culture, making sure the interaction is happening in the spirit that we want it to happen in, communicating, inspiring, etc. I can do spreadsheets and keep track of the details and do all of that, but I don't like it. The energy's not there for me. But if I find myself doing a lot of the things that aren't giving me energy, that's not going to work. So I found basically a co-lead who loves that and doesn't like really being more kind of like the center of the energy, the center of attention, making things happen, talking, initiating. And so that was a stage for me. But eventually it got to the point where I realized I need to create a succession plan. I need to turn this over to other people. I don't want to be in this role with so much responsibility forever. So that's those kind of hard looks at yourself and what you're doing. And is it possible to actually create a plan to turn this over to younger, perhaps people who might take things in different directions? They might do things differently than I did, but ultimately will be the best thing for the camp.
Awesome. And I know I did see that someone did ask to learn a little bit more about succession strategies. So maybe that's something that can be addressed in the Q&A, unless there's something you want to add just to kind of piggyback on what you just mentioned, KJ.
Well, I'll talk more maybe soon about kind of the structures of leadership structures, because that was a key part of the succession strategy. It's like, how do I set this up in the future for the next camp lead to not be in the same position so that responsibilities are more distributed? So, and that moves into camps, like the structure of leadership.
Right. And that's a good segue for what I wanted to add, which helps us to segue as well into the next area that we wanted to talk about is, for me, what helps me, I love spreadsheets. So kind of opposite of KJ. Papa Bear one time gave me a pin that says, placement, I do it for the spreadsheets. There's something about it. So, as well as other things. But with those spreadsheets, what I do is we have a lot of information that has evolved over the years throughout the different leads. I have not been the lead of Fafa Camp for eternity. It's kind of, fortunately, we've had a number of leads, but I've always been somewhat involved. And over the years, what's evolved is just some clearer expectations. And I think that's really important. This year, we put together something called the community principles, I believe, of FAFA, just a one-pager because we felt that if there's too much information, like our handbook, people, and we have a lot of international people who are second language, we don't have it in all different languages, where English is their second language. So we created something kind of short with expectations and then a clear delegation of roles. And so that's what we're going to start talking about in our next topic is our leadership structure and our structure strategies. So once again, in the chat, Andy's going to share what I have been continually evolving. So even like yesterday, as we were looking at the different roles, this is something that evolves. And these are guidelines. So we have area descriptions for like transportation, for example. We ask people in our survey at the beginning of our cycle, are you interested in co-leading? Or are you interested in being on a team? Because everybody participates at FAFA. And then, inevitably, we get usually more than enough people who volunteer to be a team lead. And sometimes people don't volunteer, but we know that they're really good at team leading. So we may reach out to those people individually. So we let people self-select. So for example, with transportation, we just, asked someone, they said yes, had lots of questions. Once again, those questions helped me to kind of clear out the expectations of, okay, you've signed up to be our transportation lead. What does that mean? So when the people are signing up to do it, they're really clear on what the expectations are. And we find in our camp that when the expectations are clear and we all feel really comfortable just saying what they are and not taking on like, oh, I have to do this, people didn't do it. It's like having that conversation. It's just to be sure that we can have those expectations be very clear. So in our case, we have these designated areas, our beautiful camp, all things perishable, kitchen, strike, build, etc. And then the next step, and this is something we just started last year after we camped next to Camp Universal in 2019, and they had this team model. So we thought, and they're a great camp. If you ever want to have a good conversation about how to run a camp, Farhad and that team is really great to talk to. So we started this team-based system. And so then what will happen next is once we get all of our team leads, then for the rest of the camp gets to choose what team they want to be on. So then the camp, the co-leads of each area, it's their responsibility to kind of, herd those cats or get those people inspired or help them inspire themselves, however you want to look at it, and set up how that team is going to serve the camp for the 10 days that we're out there. So that's the team, kind of the team-based model that we use. So I think that's about what I have to say about that. T-Fire, I know that in your camp, you do a shift-based task or chores. So can you just talk a little bit about what your structure looks like and the shift-based system?
Yeah, so I have a small camp. It's called Deadbeat Club, and Deadbeat Club is part of, as you heard in the beginning, if you were here with us, Barbie Death Village, which is huge. And Andy, thank you so much for popping a document into the chat. So what's in there? It's just a little sample document of one of the little shift structures. Also, we do have, if you're looking at the chat, we've got Mom in here, who's she's the lead for Barbie Death Village, and she's amazing at it. And she'll actually be a panelist this afternoon as well. So tune in for all that. But we basically, both within Barbie Death Village and Deadbeat Club, we do function on a shift model, not the team model. And so it's very a la carte. So in the way I structure it for Deadbeat Club is there is a little bit of movement in there to have it be kind of team oriented. So if you do end up taking a look at that document, you'll see what I put up there is, so we offer coffee. We're one of the coffee camps. And there are 3 or 4 people per shift in coffee. And so you have the opportunity to either just kind of plug in for the day that works for you, or to form your team and say, these are the 3 people I want to be doing the thing with. And there are suggestions about kind of what the ideal breakdown of the duties are, but it's up to the individuals to figure out, or up to the teams to figure out what works for themselves. The other thing that I did for last year, which I think was pretty effective, was rather than doing training sessions either on Zoom or in person on Playa, I just invited everybody to please go into the back of house area for coffee at some point before their shift and do a little 20-minute run through with the people who are doing it, and have, it's that thing about, when you teach, that's when you really become proficient, right? And so it's kind of passing the baton a little bit so that I'm not the one always doing the teaching, and they get to do it on their schedule as well.
And T-Fire, can you remind us how many people are in your camp within your village?
Yeah, it's just like 20. So it's Deadbeat Club is little.
Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic.
Barbie is huge.
Barbie is huge, yeah.
Yes.
Jason, would you like to add on to that?
Sure. I think I was going to join in with KJ and follow up on the idea of small teams is one way that we alleviate some of the pressure. So KJ, if you want to take it away, or if you want me to lead on it, you can follow me. Here we
Sure,
go.
go ahead. Go ahead.
So our first burns, but my first burn was in the 90s, and that was when the scale was so small that the only things that showed up were things that people wanted to bring. And over the years, the scale has gotten bigger and bigger with structures, shade structures, art, everything. And so the system that I had been sort of trying to just do everything I could to help everybody in every way. And I found that I was getting overwhelmed, and burnout was, imminent. And something that I figured out a few years back was handing off some things, like having the gray water be something that everybody handles their own gray water, which I know doesn't work in a 300-person camp, but in a 60 to 75-person camp, carrying out your little, bucket of gray water meant that at the end of the week, we didn't have a garbage pool. And it also made people aware of the water they were using. It made people wash their dishes more mindfully. So drafting on that, I just started to realize that we basically have about 10 different departments: the shade structures, mooping, the art car, organizational things like the forms. And so whatever anybody wanted to contribute, they can basically work together in small teams and feel the agency that they are being a part of what they wanted to see improve. And it took more, it's been taking the pressure off of my shoulders. Small teams, we're in our 3rd year doing it. And the first year, it was a little bit it was problematic because everybody was enthusiastic before the burn, but once their feet were on the playa, they're at Burning Man, and they lost a sense of, oh, I'm on the shower. And being on the shower means setting it up, putting lights, mooping it, making sure that it's placed in a location that, isn't in the walkways. And so that's just an example, or the kitchen, or the shade, or anything. So that first year was a little rough, but the second year was better. The 3rd year was stellar, and I'm actually excited for this next year coming up, because I feel like our camp has perfectly, kind of organizationally, very organically, found its groove, found its way to rivulet into people taking care of their part of the river, their part of the tributary.
Well, I like that. And I like the fact that you stuck with it for those 3 years. From what I understand, oftentimes it does take 3 times or 3 years to have something really give it a chance to work. KJ, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to acknowledge one great thing about Burning Man is it's a constant experimentation. And when you have 1,300 theme camps, everyone comes up with approaches. And it's really wonderful to have forums like this where we can share those approaches. And so we have a few panelists, but I think what's being shared in the chat's just as valuable. So thank you to all of you for helping us to share that. One thing that I wanted to mention, I'd like to look at, well, what are the patterns in all of these, like in all of these different approaches? And one thing that I'm a big believer in is systems thinking or systems theory, which basically says the structure of systems is what leads to behavior, which is what leads to the results that we end up with, right? And it's easy just to blame the behavior. Oh, people aren't participating, or, they're not responding or whatever. But you have to go back from that. Well, what is the structure of the system that would actually then lead to the behavior that we want? So when I was kind of burning out, and we had tried the 2-lead approach, but really then 2 people get burned out. And because of my kind of personality, which I think a lot of us probably share this trait, is that if I own something like a theme camp, like I basically not own, but if, I take ownership of it, like I cover the bottom line. And so if, the post office needs sweeping out, I'll get the broom and I'll be sweeping it out or whatever. So when I decided to create a different type of leadership structure, I decided to call it the post office custodians. So, because, we're covering the bottom line. And we looked at, well, who is really stepping up the most here for our camp? And we basically made them our first iteration, and then made them in charge of kind of different areas. But one thing that we've always done in a more team-based approach, we not only don't have shifts, we kind of forbid shifts. So it's kind of like in the post office, we want the people there serving the public, interacting with them. And we call ourselves a creative interaction theme camp that uses postal services as an excuse for interacting. So it's really about the interaction. You want people there who are really inspired to be there and on fire to be there. And you want them to be on fire from the time they start. And then when they feel their energy shift, they need to leave. Mm-hmm. And we kind of applied that to all of the areas of our camp, that we want people doing stuff when they're inspired to. But that takes a decentralized approach. Otherwise, it would be me doing everything, right? It takes a decentralized approach. That's the approach we took, of having teams, about 8 teams, each with a team lead. That person's responsible for that area, but everyone in the camp is a part of at least one team. Usually it's 1 or 2 teams. And that seemed to then work. That seemed to take a lot of load off of the TCO. And it made sure that people were doing things when they really love to do them. Now, of course, the one area that could be problematic is the kitchen, like cleaning up the kitchen. Who's going to clean up the kitchen? So we actually even created a system for that. I won't get into some of those details, but basically it's looking at that principle of how can we do this so that it inspires everybody to do their part, without it being just a drag because somebody has to do it because it's their shift. And if they don't show up, then who does it? And then it leads to resentment, etc. So we follow this principle of really having people engaged in whatever they're doing.
Fantastic. And KJ, your camp's about 50 people, right?
Correct.
I keep just bringing this up in case people didn't hear the intro, because it does matter how many people we have in our camp when we're talking about our strategies. So we were, looking to get, we've got a smaller camp, mid-sized camp. And just the thing that came up in the chat that I just wanted to address before we move on is having people feel kind of autonomous about, what they're doing. And I agree with KJ that, this is all kind of an experiment. And I feel like we give, at least with FAFA, we give people this ability to say, hey, this is what we're kind of hoping for, say, transportation. If you've got other ideas, other ways to do it, bravo, let's talk about it. It's always evolving. And that to me, I really like. And I think as a camp lead, you have to let go. You have to let go of your idea that there's one way to do it, because there is not one way to do this. So just, that little thing to add in. We want to move on now. We have our little time thing that we're very aware of. So I know that we're moving quickly through these topics, but with an hour and 15 minutes is what we need to do. We want to talk about, again, a little bit piggybacking off of what KJ just finished his input about, how do we get people to feel motivated? So how do you motivate your campers to participate fully? And how do you find campers who are motivated? And actually, this was a question I have back to you, KJ. So if you're ready to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And one part is motivating campers, the other is finding motivated campers. And that can be a process of iteration. If someone's a virgin in our camp and they don't fully participate, we give them a bye their first year. If someone's new to our camp but is an experienced burner, they don't get that. Really, everyone needs to be participating if they're going to be invited back to our camp. And that's just that process alone over a period of years leads to a bunch of people who are like we're all in it together, we're making this happen. There's a spirit to it. Someone brought up teardown in the chat, like who's ever inspired to do strike? But actually, those people who do it usually end up enjoying it. And one thing we learned in 2023 was that everyone had to stay. A lot of people had to stay past when they thought they could stay. And they found out that their lives didn't completely fall apart and they were there for strike. And with that many people there, it was really light for everybody. So now we're requiring everyone to be part of build, strike, or both. And there's a limited number of people for build because of the number of laps we have. So that means a number of people are going to need to be a part of that. But I think last year they learned that it was actually pretty fun in the end.
Nice, nice. Thanks for that. Thank you. The other thing that we talked about as a group here, as we were preparing for this breakout, is that the importance to value people for the skills that they bring. And KJ, you talked a little bit about that, about, some people just like love strike, or, they like that part. But this is a really important thing because not everybody can swing a hammer, say, or do everything. So Jason, do you want to address that about talking about how valuing the way that people might participate in different ways?
Right. Yeah, that's, I think, one of the most important things about the burn is that people are coming to share what they want to bring to the burn. And for some camps, if it works that your whole camp is doing the same thing, everybody is locking arms, then if that works for you, then that's great. But I think to avoid burnout is to recognize that some people who maybe are working on their makeup all day or costumes or wander off, that their burn is a part of what makes the burn special and different. And that if we expect everybody to do this, take on the same roles, then we can't necessarily expect people to thrive individually. And so our camp was roughly 75 people for a few years, and a whole group of campmates just went off to form their own camp. And it was really great seeing them march off into the hills because we have a whole new way for our camp to grow, where the people who are joining are coming in to bring their part to what makes our camp, which was exciting. It's exciting to see, and we're in a growth period that I'm really. It's coinciding with the small teams, so it's really exciting to see it take shape. Where somebody who devotes some time to being that sparkle pony, which is a derogatory term that really just means somebody who brings a beauty, as long as the selfishness that can sometimes, or narcissism that can kind of get wrapped around it, or, can get perceived, is an assumption that's forgetting that we're all bringing something very beautiful and unique to the playa, and we can't necessarily expect all of our campmates to be coming to the burn on our terms, or on our expectations.
And the thing too that I just love about what you're saying too, especially about that group that kind of split off, is that we need this freshness. And I think with KJ talking about succession, and we need this freshness. We need people to move on sometimes in order to make space for these new ideas. And maybe we even need to move on and go to another camp sometime, and not in a situation of duress, but more of like, wow, and just recognize that. Yeah, and T-Fire, you want to talk a little bit about, the documentation that we have. You're a spreadsheet person, I'm a spreadsheet person, docs person. Having those documents that when we were talking, we talked about enshrining the knowledge, and I said, well, we're enshining the knowledge, because what we're doing is we're collecting that knowledge so that we can like leave it in the shared drive or whatever you're using to share it with other people. So you want to just expand a bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's also a document in the chat now, or a link rather, that I'll get back to. But yeah, so first of all, I love the turn of phrase and shining. It's beautiful. For me, a lot of it is about sort of decentering the role of the camp lead, the TCO, the theme camp organizer. That's something that KJ talked about a little bit. I personally kind of live in fear of becoming synonymous with my camp, right? It's Deadbeat Club, it's not T-Fire's camp. I don't want to be, the go-to person for every single thing. And I don't want people to feel like they're not empowered to learn up on something that they want to do, or get a little training, or be accountable, or jump in, right? If they've got a campmate who's not feeling well that day, and this happened a couple of times in our camp, we had campmates who stepped in beautifully when they didn't know what they were doing. And we had behind our coffee bar just a big binder with tabs, because I am a documents person, right? And so it was everything from the ratios on the coffee to what the cleanup strategy is, to what goes where, what the shifts are. I mean, just everything had its own tab. So that, I think that really empowers people to know that they can know if they choose to, right? The other one for us, so the link that you have is it's for our website, Deadbeat Club website. And I think this sort of thing about documenting carries on after the burn. I want to take a moment also to shout out Jason's website, which just holds so much knowledge. But for us, a big piece that was important. So as if you were here for the intro, you know that I've been really involved with BED, the Bureau of Erotic Discourse. I do consent training, all of that kind of stuff. I do work like that in Default World as well. And I come from a village that has had a history of bad behavior, that we've been working really hard to, kind of curb and redirect and retrain. And we've kicked out some people. So one of the things that we added, thank you for the BED link too there. One of the things that we added at Deadbeat Club was a whole page that is about the 11th principle. And so we, as a camp and as a village, we decided that the 11th principle is enthusiastic consent. We created language around that. And we created an accountability form, a reporting form. So if people experience things on Playa that felt like, whoa, that was not okay, we had a reporting mechanism for it on Playa. And then, sometimes you have kind of a, 2 weeks later, 2 months later, like, whoa, I keep thinking about this and it's just not okay. You can still today go back to that form, submit it, we'll review it. And we actually had disciplinary actions taken against camp members because we have an enshined system for keeping tabs on behaviors and what our expectations are within the camp.
Outstanding. Thanks. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah. And feel free to anybody.
Yeah, KJ, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so the link is up. Feel free to borrow that language, steal that language. You don't need to cite it. We workshopped it. It's here for sharing. And you can get in touch with me directly if you want PDFs or anything of the documents.
Yeah. I think it's probably a PDF of our intro and orientation guide was posted earlier. And, we've really used that as a way to start to set the culture of our camp. So like from the time someone first contacts us and applies to our camp and they're accepted into the camp, they get that, they're asked to read it. We have our history in there, our camp principles, and just basically it orients people to the culture that we are trying to create within our camp, which we feel like is, unique to our camp. And so this isn't something that other camps can copy, but it's something other camps can use to maybe inspire a similar way of starting to orient people from the beginning.
Yeah, and KJ, you had shared that with me, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and then I ended up integrating it into our FAFA handbook and stuff. So again, it's a constant process of evolution as we all learn more and get to see what others are doing, because again, it's a big learning process with all of us. The one thing I just wanted to mention, just someone had mentioned about reading documents, and T-Fire, just how I know with our camp sometimes it's hard to ask, people don't seem to read to the bottom of the document. When you're talking about all your documents, is there any way that you have to spice them up or something to get people to maybe read to the bottom, or any advice you can give around that, just since it's so related to what you were just talking about?
We have really sexy documents. If I can, I don't want to like pitch a business or anything, but Canva is a great free design app. Make your stuff cute. Make it fun, make it pop. Some of the stuff that's really important, we created vinyl banners of things. And so if you're only seeing it at a glance the first time, you might come back a second time and read a little bit further. But there are also design tips, and you can look up quick design tips for how to lay out a document so that it draws your eyes in particular directions, and how, like, what your eyes are drawn to kind of first, second, and third. So I think drawing on some of those, well-known design tips goes a long way.
Great. Thanks for that. So as we kind of move along with our breakout session, the next thing that we wanted to talk about, which we touched on very briefly earlier, is basically leadership self-care in a way through mindfulness practices. And Jason, you took us through just a short little breath reminder and body movement reminder, but can you talk to us about how you integrate mindfulness? And I liked, while we were talking earlier, this concept of building energy versus spending energy, because I think as camp leads, oftentimes I could use that word, that I am spent. And so you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. I really appreciate the idea that as a camp lead to not see a mess and figure out who's going to clean it up, but rather engage, participate, grab a broom, take those breaks when you need to, but also a part of being mindful is participating in your camp directly, getting out of camp for sure from time to time, but remembering that your camp is your art in a way. And so those mindful practices, those are survival mechanisms. Some of them might seem like we can forget to wear gloves or closed-toed boots, or catch shade when we can, drink water, the classic halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, taking that break for yourself to to just take a step back, and then remember that taking a step in is not going once back into the breach. It's embodying the art that you brought to the playa. It's an honor, it's a privilege, it's a joy. And when it is in full throttle, when a camp is, all the pistons are firing, you'll see people lining up, you'll see smiles, you'll see people crying, you'll see people having transformative experiences. And the way that that happens is because we made sure the generators were still full, or we structured some team to make sure that they're still full, or we figured out some green solution to have solar panels to make sure that the lights stay on. And all of that effort is its own reward. And there's a way of thinking of it not as, oh, I got to go through this pain in the ass to make the camp happen. It's more a thing of, what can you provide and do to create that space that your camp can flourish in? And that's heady talk, and it certainly gets challenged from time to time. And there have been years where somebody dropped the ball, or placement made us appeal because our camp participation wasn't properly laid out in the way that they were expecting. And those moments are opportunities to kind of hone our ability to weather them. And we can think of them as something that makes us just better for it as people, to carry out into the world. That when somebody cuts us off on the freeway, there's a part of our practice of being out on the playa that we realize that we're all in this together, and we want to embody and be a part of the world we want to create. And so for me, the mindfulness, it's also some studies, whether it's the 4 agreements or the Stoics, just remembering to be at your core, and your core is beautiful. And when things take you off of that, just find your way back to it, and things will work out.
I like to think of each camp as part of a fractal. And, Burning Man is like this complete thing, and the camps are, and the art, everything. But if we're just looking at the camps, and all part of creating the space. So we're creating the space within our camp. We're creating the space first, maybe even just in our tent, within our camp, within our sector, within our larger space, and then just out and just carrying that. And so, yeah, a very important thing to keep in mind, creating the space, holding that space to a certain degree. Yes.
I had one thing to add that I just noticed is leadership begins with ourselves. So lead ourselves right, and others can follow, they can find their way. But just remember to take those breaks, to fill out those forms, to stay on target. Just be your best partner in the process.
Love that. Love that. Thank you so much for that information. We are now wanting to see what your questions are, so that we can address those. We've just got about 15 more minutes until we need to finish. So Andy, are there questions that you'd like to unmute and address to us?
Absolutely. First off, everybody, thank you for your active comments and helping each other out. I think there's been a few that have really hit to what we've been talking about. And the first one is from Kimberly. And it was, tell us about a succession plan when a strong leader steps down. And it also kind of goes with another one, which is, how do you attract younger folks to kind of have a bench, which was by Rat Lady.
I'll talk about that a little bit, because I just executed a succession plan. Because I noticed, as somebody who's got a lot of history of going to Burning Man and having been a founder of this camp quite a while back, that even after I created the custodians and I had this team of people, if we would be discussing some issue, after I would say something, everyone would kind of converge around that. It's like, because they held me in this, kind of esteemed role. But I didn't want that. But I realized that as long as I was in that position, people were gonna, because of my history, were gonna hold me in that light. And I was ready to change that. I felt like the camp needed it, and we needed to bring in younger people. And so we made an effort. We courted younger members. We got them involved. We got a few of them onto our custodian team. And I created a plan for first creating the custodians, then creating someone who was kind of my shadow for a year, like as TCO. So he was seeing everything I was doing with placement and all of that. And then the next year I turned it over to him. This was 2023. I turned it over to the new TCO, and it totally changed that because he did a great job and people really liked him, but now it was this team who was doing it. It wasn't this one person being kind of put on a pedestal and whatever she or he or they said went. And so it actually worked beyond my expectations because it brought energy in. Because there wasn't burned out leadership at all. You had this team, everyone was into it. People saw them as a team, didn't put it all on one person, that it really made a difference. But that plan took about, from beginning to end, probably 5 burns to fully execute before I could really responsibly fully pull back. So just be prepared for that. And now it's like I'm looking at in 2024, do I really want to be a part of this camp? Because I noticed in 2023 I had stepped back, but people still kind of like deferred to me or looked up to me. I had to kind of keep my mouth shut in a way. And people would say, "Oh, don't you do that? We'll do that," like helping with things with build or with strike or whatever. It's like, "Oh, you've earned it, just don't do it." It's like, what fun is it to be in a camp and not be involved in it? So I feel like maybe it might be time for me just to move out of the camp altogether. I'm still there in kind of in the background to be able to give input or advice if anyone needs it, but just kind of like moving on to whatever is next for me.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing to think about as a lead when there is a succession plan. Who are you then as the lead? And it almost seems like, this is a part that could be not included in the succession plan. But I think from your experience and from talking to you about this, it feels like this is something that really needs to be included in the succession plan. Who is the lead, and guiding people on like how to treat the former lead. But yeah, very complicated.
Yeah, and I don't want complicated.
Right. Right.
I'm giving up. I let go of complicated.
That's right.
So.
Great. Thank you. Andy, another question.
Sure, we've got another one. There's a few that kind of also fed together from Poppins and Lisa. And it was how to confirm commitment early on, and how do you discuss your roles and how-tos? And then with kind of a sub question from KR, how do you get them engaged and get them to commit and get them fired up for that? And then with another one from Claire, especially if they're spread off across the country or the world. So to get it shorter, how do you engage people ahead of time, particularly if you're spread out, and get that commitment locked in?
I would love to just highlight a comment somewhere way up in the chat. I don't remember who it's from, but somebody was saying that when they are talking to prospective campmates, that they have a script that they go through on the phone, detailing, what the expectations are. And there were a lot of responses to that. People were very enthusiastic about that and asking for that script. So scroll up. I think that's really beautiful. Oh, good. Haley, you're awesome. Yeah, so I think that's really good. I think, when people are all over the place, having a breakdown of shifts that includes basically kind of the year-round model of Burning Man I like Jason is really good about thinking about, Burning Man in the big picture sense. We've had great conversations about that. But I know that, there are some people that because of their geography, time commitments, kids, whatever it might be, they might be really available to put in a bunch of work 3 months before the burn. And then they might be, we had a couple of folks who, were swinging hammers and painting and designing and, laying out camp and all of this. And then they flew in and took the Burner Express, and there was zero resentment because they had an option to do shifts off playa. So think about what works for you.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that in our role, kind of delineation, our co-leads, we have a column that is if you need to be local, because I would say 2/3 of our camp is international. And so there are tasks like the accountant that can be a non-local job, or lead area transportation. The person doesn't need to be local. So we really, when we're looking at delineating the roles in the camp, we're looking at it in that way. And the other thing that we do is that our steward cell allocation, I base our steward cell allocation on the number of co-leads that we have, and always ask for that. We always seem to get a few less, but that's okay. But then that's the other carrot, is that if you agree to this, and we need to have that commitment, if you agree to this, then you'll be allocated one of the steward sale tickets. And we also try to include people who haven't always done it. And there's always a risk there when you're doing that. But we want to, keep like deepening the bench, like we're saying, because it'd be easy just to go back and have the same person if they're returning to do transportation or food or whatever. But let's try to expand that bench so more people understand the amount of work that needs to be done, pre-playa.
Some other things that we're doing to keep people engaged year round, so that we don't have that kind of gulf of time where it's like crickets when you send out a message or whatever. We have monthly community Zoom meetings, and they're fun. I mean, there's really no agenda other than, hey, let's connect. How are we all doing? What's up with you guys? And so we get good participation in that. And then we are fairly spread out, but there's a concentration of people in the Bay Area, and so occasionally getting together in person as well. We also have a WhatsApp group that goes, gets a lot of activity year round. And, people sending pictures or things related to post offices or whatever it is. We had someone send a post office from like the southernmost tip of Tierra del Fuego or whatever it was. It's like, it just keeps people engaged. So I think those kinds of strategies are useful as well, from right after the burn when people are inspired and excited about it.
Nice.
I actually have something to add. Yeah. For the welcome speech, something that I make sure to incorporate is that I let people know that I'm telling the same speech to everybody in camp, that there are no different terms for anybody, that we're all camping together, and that it is their burn as well, and that they're not indentured to our camp, that they are participating in our camp on their terms, and we figure out what those terms are through their agency. And one final thing, I just noticed we're getting close to the end of the time, but it really helps to be said for avoiding camp burnout, is just how lucky we are to have such great friends who help shoulder the load, where so many people aren't responding to the messages, aren't donating, aren't stepping up. And I'm lucky to say that I have a few very dear, great friends who have made it fun to build, made it fun to operate all week long, and make it fun to tear down, and make it fun to put the camp away. And I think that that's one way to avoid burnout, is to be so lucky to have great friends to do this with.
Yay. That's wonderful. What do you think? We have time maybe for one more question, if we can just limit our answers. Go ahead, Andy.
We actually had one left, so that's perfect. And
Okay.
it was from Friend Zone. And it's, how do you have the difficult conversations, maybe if a camp member has perhaps a substance abuse issue or something of that nature? How do you get those conversations started?
on playa, do you think? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah,
Or-
they were. Let me bring it back up. Friends, okay. It's a part of their opening camp meeting. They talk about substance intake, but they've had people in the past who were too much or did inappropriate things. And yeah, during the burn, how do you approach those people from like a leadership standpoint?
Yeah.
Kind of.
I can take this for a moment. I'm sure everybody has some experience with this. You know, our village has had a lot of ups and downs with some of this kind of thing. Last year, what we did was we began with a whole village meeting that was mandatory. Everybody who was on playa had to be there, and we went through the rules and we went through the expectations, and it was very clear that people who were you know, out of line in whatever the specific ways, you know, the camp decides for themselves, you know, they might get a warning or they might just be asked to leave. And that's actually something I've been impressed with in Barbie from my very first time camping there. I had a friend who actually got kicked out before the burn even started. So I think have really clear boundaries and a very clear action plan, and actually follow up. Don't be afraid to follow up.
Agreed. And we talk about it. And the thing is, you know, now some of our campers are bringing their kids. And that's when it's very inappropriate to have open drug use, when you've got like a 10-year-old or 11-year-old who might not understand what's going on there. And so I've just gone up to people directly. And I think it's always, you know, as long as you're kind. I mean, back to what Jason's saying, you know, we're creating a space. We're here in love. We're here. And it's like, hey, you know, this is not the place to be doing this right now. You know what our expectations are. You know that we've talked about this, and it's not the first time they've heard it, which I think is, you know, what you're saying, T-Fire, is like, make sure you have those expectations laid out at the beginning, because then you can always go back to that. Say, remember that page, or remember that conversation, or, you know, wherever you have it documented, that, you know, drug use is going to be X, Y, and Z, whatever your camp decisions are around that.
I think it can depend too on if it's episodic or chronic. So we've had situations where someone overdid it sometime, and we'd have to kind of baby them through it in a sense. And then the next day after they're recovered, at least somewhat, then having a conversation about it. If it proves to be a chronic pattern, if we can get through the burn, they won't be invited back. And we'll have those conversations with them off playa.
Right.
We had one situation, I'll just mention too. This was actually before BRC3PO. I was leading another camp, and we had a domestic violence situation. And that's the one time that we had someone leave our camp.
During the burn.
Yeah, during the burn. And we would not allow that.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for your input. It's time for us to wrap up. We have to be off right at 2:15 so that that next session can be coming in. Thank you to our panelists, KJ, T-Fire, Jason, and to our tech mod, Chomp, who is in the back. You don't see Chomp, but back there, making sure all of our tech stuff is going on. Thank you to Andy, our chat moderator, who is throwing all of those links in the chat so that we can have our discussion here. Thank you to the participants. It's been such an active chat. And this is what we like. We remember, there's no one way to do it. We're just here to like kindle that conversation, let's say. And just remember, if you're interested in these kind of things, there is the Campfire Talks program. We are in our 4th season for Campfire Talks. We have a Campfire Talk coming up on April 15th. They're usually about once a month, and we're going to be talking about the Mastering Your Camp layout. So keep an eye out for that. And once again, thank you to everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the symposium. So thanks again.